Now we're live.
We're live. Look at that.
We're live. Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Love it.
So in spite of the snow and all kinds of technical stuff, we're actually doing it, ladies.
Yes, yes. We're here again. We're here again.
Okay,
So how do I get to see you all online?
Sorry?
How do I get online? I know I'm not on live, just my voice, but how do I get to see you all?
Go on MAWOCC's page.
Huh?
Go on MAWOCC's page.
The Facebook page, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, and we should be showing up there now.
Yeah, we should be there.
Until freedom.
There we go.
It says we're muted, but we're there. That's not a bad picture.
Yeah, I'll take it.
This is the Zoom that's muted. Y'all.
Oh. Okay.
No, they
All
could
right.
they could hear us. Just the Zoom is muted.
Okay.
Are we ready to say who's here?
Should we give it a start, everybody?
I think so. I think it's about that time.
Okay, so today we have at least 3 of us on camera this time, and Jean Morrison is on phone with us, and Chioma is here too. Okay?
Yes.
So I'm just going to say a couple things here, if I can find my notes, because my memory is not good. So as people probably remember, this whole thing came about because we reached out from the League of Women Voters in Winchester. We reached out to MAWOCC over a year ago after we were inspired by the League of Women Voters' new diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And after our initial contacts and a few phone group conference calls with several members of both groups, we decided to offer a series of Facebook Live events as a way to share and continue our process of exploring some kind of ongoing partnership between the 2 organizations. So I thought we'd go around and all introduce ourselves. So I'm Patty Shepard. I'm with the League of Women Voters in Winchester.
Angelina Camacho. I'm with the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition.
I'm Lynn Brodsky, and I'm with the League of Women Voters in Winchester.
And again, we have Jean Morrison on the phone with MAWOCC. And Chioma, can you say who you are?
Sure, I'm Chioma Inachi. I'm with the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition,
And
Eastern Region.
And she's the Eastern Region Vice President.
That's right.
So we're very lucky to have her here today. So I think it's time for Jean to give us a brief overview of how we got here. Does that work for you, Jean?
Yeah, I will repeat a little bit of what you said, Patty. So, subsequent to the League of Women, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Subsequent to the League of Women Voters annual leadership meeting back in October 2008, as Patty said, at the state level, the leadership made a decision to want to really officially work on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues for the League, as well as take it a step further and change how they do business. And not really trying to bring the League together with all of its various local leagues, not work in silos, but come together. And so there was a panel of about 4 or 5 organizations representing diversity. And Celia Blue, the president of the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, was one of the guest panelists who spoke to the audience of various local leagues that attended this meeting. And the premise was that there was not really any longer any excuse not to do this work, and especially in today's time, that it was really important to include women of color in the League. So the goal of the panel was really to make a focus on how do we become more effective and inclusive, to build strong partnerships with like-minded organizations that represent diversity. And some of the focus of the panelists, I'll speak for Celia and MAWOCC, was to educate members about MAWOCC, the mission and the work, and areas where MAWOCC does work that might overlap with the League, and then discussing how the League can better work with women of color. And further, people discuss how can the League build stronger relationships and networks with organizations like MAWOCC to be more inclusive. And feedback from that dialogue was a lot of work needed to be done to build a league that was diverse and equitable and inclusive. And it was really a wake-up call. And that prompted local leagues such as Winchester to reach out to MAWOCC and talk about doing work together. And I believe the initial focus, Patty, was, or the ask was for MAWOCC to get involved with the League of Women Voters Winchester and a project that you might be doing with the ACLU around the criminal justice issues. And in the beginnings of those conversations, what was realized was that MAWOCC really wanted to take a step back and talk about issues for us to consider in working together, because MAWOCC really wants to work with an organization with a similar mission, but also when considering working with organizations that have had a history of systemic and institutionalized racism, it wasn't really appropriate or beneficial to MAWOCC to get involved in one singular opportunity event, because that's not really how you get to inclusion. And it really didn't support MAWOCC's mission to partner with organizations that have authentic models with respect to racial justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work, which is the breast or the crust of why MAWOCC is doing work for women of color. It's not just for advancement of women of color, but it's also to address the systems that are in place that can be obstacles for women of color to move forward. And so that led to the Winchester League of Women Voters. If I say Worcester sometimes, please forgive me, because there's work being done with Worcester too. So it is Winchester that I'm talking about. So the Winchester League of Women Voters, there were 3 fabulous ladies from a steering committee who agreed to do some more exploration around overcoming betrayal and inclusion and trying to get to a model for building an inclusive and respectful partnership. And that's where we are today, phase 4 of that conversation.
So thank you, Jean. You want to
Did
jump
I leave
in
anything
here?
out?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in.
Are you finished?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So
All
Angie's
right.
going to jump in.
So, Jean, thank you again. Hello, everyone. Angelina Camacho. When we're thinking about the work, we titled this Until Freedom Truly Rings. And there's a little bit of a background to that title, not just because this is MLK weekend, but because his message really tied in with a lot of the issues that we talked about. When we first started this conversation, we originally started the phone conversation around celebrating the upcoming centennial, and the first major piece that came out, besides are we ready to have a real conversation, was also the fact that there's actually a silent centennial, where women of color, specifically Black women, were part of the suffragist movement, but we were marginalized as we move forward to the upcoming at that time passing of the amendment, and there are a number of decades shift for Black women in particular that needed to be addressed. So sometimes where we all want to come together and we want to talk about MLK's vision when we all go to our breakfasts and events where we collectively come together and celebrate the dream, it's not always as easy in practice, right? I mean, I think you would agree, as this series has shown us. When we think about his campaign, we think about the fact that it was, as much as it is to advance people of color, we really focused under MLK's dream also the Poor People's Campaign, right? Economic mobility for all of us who are suffering. However, we cannot forget that while our approach to these visions now seem to have our young people believing that we're in a post-racial society, a lot of those issues still exist and still need to be reconciled. For instance, when we're talking about the work that MAWOCC does, when we're talking about education, we know that there's a huge disparity in regards to our young people who are able to access college, and even some of our older.
Jane, can you mute your phone since we can hear your background? Can you just mute your phone?
Jean, can you mute your phone, honey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. When we're talking about the work that MAWOCC does in education, we know that our Black children are struggling. Even in BPS, there's a lot of work that we have to do in Boston, and even though there are bright spots, there's also dark corners in a district that is only 14% white. That means everybody else are people of color. And then even now, I came over because of the dream that has gone away from a number of us as emerging older adults who weren't able to get the college education that should have been due to all of us. It's something that I'm working on, and I'm very public about it. I actually just came from school straight here because it's something that for many immigrant families is a challenge. It is a challenge, and especially when I'm talking about Latina issues, I have to go forward as an Afro-Latina, and for me, the way we address Blackness may not be the same as those who come from Plymouth Rock. So there's a dream deferred there too. When I look at politically, which brought us together, there's not only voter apathy in a number of voting blocks of color, but it's voter apathy that is well founded in years and years of policy that has abused our right to access to many different things. We're talking about home ownership, building credit, that kind of thing, which actually leads to my area, economic empowerment with MAWOCC, which really has, for many generations, moved us not from the margin to the center, but has continually held us back, and our systems have not actually caught up. So when we talk about, until freedom truly rings, we have to take a page out of the book of our Jewish colleagues, and let's not forget. Let's not forget the ways that our people have been marginalized, their sacrifice. And in some ways, I'll even go, we can't compare apples to apples, but, there is a very, very deep hatred that has been imposed upon our people, that has killed so many of our people. And while every life is essential, we can't forget that there are many lives still being lost. And so until we can sit at that table hand in hand, and everyone has access to the same economic opportunity, everyone has access to the same educational opportunity, everyone can go to a voting booth and say that my voice matters, and actually have confidence that it does matter. We really are still choking down our eggs and ham and bacon and all the good stuff that we will have on Monday, hoping to be able to say, free at last, free at last. Thank God I'm free at last.
Wow. Thank you.
Sorry.
I apologize. That was great. That's wonderful.
Now I'm ready to vote for you.
Really.
God
That
bless
vote
you.
would
Thank
count.
you.
That vote would count. So I see next on our agenda we have a number of discussions, starter questions. Are we just starting on that? Are we getting anything from the chat yet? So we were going to start with maybe talking about so one of the things that we did between now and the last Facebook Live event was that each group had its own internal conversations about what our next steps might be and what sort of the pros and cons of what we've been doing. So one of the questions we thought we'd try to address is what kinds of challenges and opportunities did we discuss in our internal conversations? So I don't know if anybody's thought about that question or knows what they want to say.
Well, so I'd like to just talk about the process as it relates to projects we do together. When I first started this whole set of conversations, I felt that it was very processy and I felt very stupid because I'm pretty good at organizing events, but process isn't something I'm used to. And in the process of sort of listening to the members of MAWOCC talk about these issues, I learned the reason we need process is because there's such a history of oppression and marginalization of women of color, which you were alluding to, that there's a lack of trust. And so the process is necessary for us to just be talking and being together and sharing ideas so that we can prove that we're reliable allies. And I think that Jean said something that I think really encapsulated the whole thing in the last Facebook Live conversation, where she said there's sort of three elements to this truth and reconciliation process, and one is sharing an experience. And we sort of did some of that when we talked about the differences between black and white feminists and what the different experiences and goals were. The different ways women of color and white women experience and express emotion and are responded to by the dominant society. The second thing was doing our research, and so we've all been just reading and learning the history and sociology and just turning on our TVs and looking at the news. And then the third thing is going forward, which is kind of what we're moving on to now, is working on projects, but hopefully bringing increased trust in each other and understanding of the different places that we've all been. And that was, and then after I sort of really re-listened to the last Facebook Live, and particularly, paying attention to what Jean was saying, it really crystallized all of it for me. And I understood what we were doing much better, but I started out being very ignorant and not understanding it at all.
I think that's important to bring up, because I think often we skip over process and don't really understand the value. And I'm someone, you don't have to process to keep processing the process, but you create space on what process will look like as you continue down your journey, right? And so I think often we jump to, okay, what can we do together? And then when you're in the do, you're like, oh, you think that? Oh, you don't know about that? Oh, wow. And then it's like, all the do goes away because you have to stop and y'all have to check in and figure out or make a decision at that moment. Look, this ain't gonna work, right? And so I think process is important. Even in the more that I do racial justice work, even just the more that I do advocacy work, I'm valuing sort of that beginning. Let's process a little bit if we have time, because sometimes you just gotta act.
That's true.
When shit hits the roof, sometimes you just gotta act. But let us sit down and really talk about, if we're talking about a long-term partnership, then let's take part of that long-term to process where we all are at, where our truth lies, and what are the spaces and areas that we have to work on. I think one of the things that I realized, and this is gonna be like, I just had this aha moment, Lynn, as you were talking. One of the things I realized is I think that MAWOCC needs to undo what does it mean to what we can give, right? So I don't know, Angelina, maybe you can help me sort of frame this. So when we were having our internal conversations, we talked a lot about, this is what we need for the league. This is what the league, Winchester, this is what, we can bring to the table. And we had to stop back and say, but what the hell are we getting out of it? Like, we're given all this, you know what I'm saying? We're making the chapter potentially a better chapter, a more diverse chapter, a more welcoming, all these beautiful things that we talk about when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. But then we had to stop back and be like, wait, what are we getting out of it? And it caused us to have a second conversation.
Absolutely, sure did.
Really? No, really. And it was like an eye-opener for me, because I'm like, yo, that's like black women were always giving and saving the world, and we're never thinking about what we can get out of it, what we need to survive. Not even to survive, but to live, right? And so it just made me like, when you were talking, I just had a damn aha moment, like, oh my God. Like, we need to really figure out.
That's what we're trying to get to at the call. We're going on that one, yes.
So, on the call, it was challenging.
Yes.
It was very challenging for us to get to the point of, what do we want to get out of this? And I'm going to talk, I'm not going to talk as much because I'm off video, but maybe either one of you can talk a little bit about what we said we definitely don't want.
Right. And I think to that point, Chioma, that what we don't want to do is like you were saying, giving the world and not valuing what we have to offer. There is a give and a get, right? And it, in my experience, it has been that we are supposed to want to, give our service for a shekel. And we have to get out of that, because other organizations don't approach the work like that. They're going after funding, they're going after resources and the power to leverage and being seen as stakeholders and experts. However, when we're asked to partner, why is it that we're asked to give a piece of us, and we're not giving you, and not you individually, clearly, but whenever we're approached, we're not giving you the 5, 10, 15 minutes. We're carrying on our backs hundreds of years of expertise, of carrying the message of our people, carrying the struggles of our people, and all that it will take to bring us to a place of inclusion. Even for those who are coming to the table, that's years of training and experience. And just like any other opportunity, while you're not doing it to be paid, in order for us to build the right capacity, that is a very real part of how are we going to fund the work. Because just like a personal relationship, romance without finance is dead. I mean, that's just the reality. At the end of the day, Boo and Boo too have to pay the bills. There's things that need to be done. And so what is the, for what we're giving, what are we getting? And the what is the challenge that we're trying to frame.
And we have a question from Mary. Jean, I'm gonna give you a minute. We have a question from Mary Ellis. She said, why can't we do both? And Jean, maybe in your comments you can answer that question. Mary Ellis asks, why can't we do both?
Why can't we do both?
Why can't we give and get?
Can Jean unmute her phone and tell us?
Is she trying to talk?
Do you want me to weigh in here?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I think we can give and get, but the point that is being made by you, Chioma, and Angelina is very, very important. We have to get for our value, and then we can give. The way I see it, some of it is we've paid it forward with sacrifice through history. The bills paid, what should I say? How should I say it? We've given away enough free of ourselves, and that hasn't really had a value put to it. So we have these celebrations, but we're still not really an authentic, recognized, valued part of history, which is why I think it's really important to continue to pull that history out and show how women of color, Black women, put the first astronauts up into space because of their work. It wasn't going to happen. And a lot of other firsts and things like that. It's really important to value the sacrifice that's already been made and to value the contributions of women of color and be a real part of history and not have a blind eye turn so that there's a dismissal of what we're contributing or a degrading or just disingenuous untruth. So that's part of truth and reconciliation is calling out the worth that's already there. And that and currently being valued enough to be paid for our worth. And I think, Angelina, you made an example of if someone calls us to the table to help out with diversity and inclusion, it's give our experience, give our knowledge, and thank you very much. We'll do something with you, but there's never money put towards projects that are going to be sustainable for women of color to really advance in American society in the way that we want to be and be part of it. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I think we can do both, but we have to come to a level playing field and to be seen as equal value before we can really give anymore.
Absolutely. I think it goes to the point of we can no longer be asked to be just informants. We have to be seen as important. And when I look at being seen as important, there has to be some type of reciprocal act that happens. And it doesn't have to be monetary, but in this day and age, a lot of it is. But when we look at who's being supported for leadership when we're going to the voting booth, when we look at who's being called as expert witnesses, is it consistently people of color for issues that are absolutely affecting us more than everyone else, or are we continually allowing other voices to capture our story? And we should be respected enough to be brought forward consistently and for there to be timely action and support.
So in response to what you're saying and what Jean said and how Patty opened the introduction, that you had met Celia at a conference that you both went to, and there was the league, the state and the national want us to do more with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and rather it's sort of the expression of her decentering whiteness, and rather than saying what can we do with MAWOCC to make the league better, what can we, as these women who are interested in promoting truth and reconciliation, what can we do to promote MAWOCC's agenda? And I would just put MAWOCC's agenda, women of color's agenda in front, and see, is there any project you have that you think that we would be able to help you, and just switch to who's in the center of things, because I think white women have been in the center of the action in terms of getting rights in this country for many years, and it's time to just move to the side and promote someone else's agenda, because we want to put the women of color's voices forward. So that's sort of what I would see. In terms of projects, some were suggested and some were more processy than others, but one of the projects in our internal conversations was precisely that, to see if there was, on your website, MAWOCC's website, there's an extensive legislative agenda. And is there any project in particular that you all, are struggling with and could use some extra sets of hands to move things forward? That would be sort of one of our ideas from internal conversations that would match with that way of thinking.
Yeah.
I guess.
Go ahead, Jean. I realized that.
Jean, I want to weigh in. I guess I would turn the question around and say, what do you see? I mean, we've spent time having a rich dialogue. You've spent time getting information and learning more about the history of women of color and the feminist movement and so forth. So what we're looking for is how does the league see themselves as helping out? Like, it's not so much about projects as it is understanding who we are, where we are in American society, and what are some of our challenges. And then I would ask you, what you've learned from us? What are ways that you see that as mainstream you could help us? I mean, we know what we have to do. We have the resources to do what we have to do. A lot of this dialogue has been about barriers in the way of doing those things. I want to be frank and clear about that. So knowing what the league does and knowing what your organization is and the history of your organization, what are some things that you think?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. This is very interesting because, I think for one, so what we did walk away
Alex.
as part of our, okay, the agenda are you? I'm reading what you said.
Yes.
Okay.
So who's on? What are they saying?
A powerful teacher.
Okay, so
advocate.
she said the agenda are usually the same. However, the value is not always recognized. It requires relinquishing some of the control and changing the expertise within the narrative. So I think, so that's what I was trying to get at. Like, I sort of feel as though it's the same question that we're asking. But I do agree with what Lynn said. Like, there's a shift that needs to happen. Like, and there's actually some things I don't even know if the league would support. To be frank, depending on how sort of upfront and clear they are in terms of supporting women of color and Black and brown communities. But I think, as we were talking about what's the next, we came up more with what we know we don't want and what we know we have questions around, right? And I think, what's going to be interesting is that this is going to challenge you all think about the chapter versus the league.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, it's more about, we also know that MAWOCC is a new organization, right? The league has power, political power, and probably resources that MAWOCC does not have, right? So when I say resources, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about like leverage and things like that. Okay. So what we talked about, what we came out of is saying, one, this is not going to be a one-off for us, right? So we know 2020 is a big year around voting. We're not interested in the conversation around give us some volunteers to help us register brown and Black women. Like that's we got that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not, so we're not interested in one-offs, right? What we also said is, what is the commitment from Winchester, not Patty and Lynn, right? Winchester chapter, to really critically think about what are the chapter's goals around women of color. And that's a different shift, right? Like, what does it mean? We're not talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, that. We're talking about what are your exact goals around women of color, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. What do those goals look like, right? For the chapter, right? And then also, what does that mean in terms of pushing a bigger agenda within the league, right? And that could look different. Like, I'm sure that your chapter has leverage with other chapters. I have connections with other chapters. Or, what does that pathway look like to have a bigger impact on the state level, on the national league? That's what we're talking about in terms of long term. And it does take more than, just us, right? It takes, the extension of you all's chapter. It takes the extension of MAWOCC. As MAWOCC now, 2020 goal is really focused around political and civic leadership. But I think that, there's more there than just sort of a voter campaign, sort of supporting specific legislation. For me, it's more about digging deeper into the organization to leverage the organization, the league, the chapter of the league organization, digging deeper into the chapter to leverage resources and build a bigger agenda for the league. That's the way that I'm thinking about it. And we also said,
the internal structure.
We also said that we're willing to work with Winchester on identifying goals, then using that success to encourage the organization as a whole to replicate best practices, right? So how can we shift what is happening in the chapter to collectively support the framework for a larger change, right? So what does it mean to use the chapter as a sort of pilot to create that shift, right? And then multiply that shift throughout the league. And that's a lot of work for, the women of color at the table. I mean, that's a lot of work for MAWOCC. But really thinking in that sort of framing, and I think it gets to what you're saying, Lynn. Like, no longer the shift is who are we centering, and I really appreciate that because I didn't think about it in that way. Like, who are we centering, and we need to center women of color, and even in our conversation, we were very clear about, okay, as women of color, this is what we need. Like, we're not like. All this other stuff is great, but this is what we need to continue this journey. And we're committed to the journey. Like, I think we all said, I don't know, that, this, for me personally, it's been a valuable experience. And I've enjoyed working and talking with both of you all. And so I see this as wanting to continue and figure out what that looks like. I've talked a lot. But I want to pause and let them talk. I want to pause and let them talk. So we're taking up space. I just want to,
But can I just add one quick thing?
Yeah.
I think when I talked about timely response and a little bit of what you're saying, when we're talking about centering, one of the things that I need to see, just for me, is I need to see more faces of us being developed in leadership. I mean, and that doesn't mean developed as in that person needs to be developed, but maybe the structure needs to be developed within the league to make sure that I'm seeing more faces and not just a little diversity council somewhere, because that work is important, but where is the leadership that looks like us?
Yeah, so I think that you know, there's different layers of the league, and we may have some limitations. One is that Patty and Jeanette and I are representing ourselves in this process with MAWOCC. And then the next level is we have a steering committee, which is about 7 of us, and Jeanette and I are both on that, and Patty was up until last year. And we sort of determine what we're going to do. Other members of the league can set up events without being on the steering committee, but our league in Winchester is not a big place, and because of, you know, decades of residential segregation, it's not the most diverse community in Massachusetts by far. You know, there are women of color in the league, there just aren't that many. And so our league has been focused around local elections, educational events about issues of civic importance, registering people to vote. Those have been, and then, you know, I think we do have a legislative person, but she hasn't been that active recently, and she does sort of take an interest on some of our legislative agenda at the State House, which is pretty congruent with MAWOCC's. You're on the state committee,
right, which is a good
DEI.
place to take some of these questions.
But I think that in terms of what can we do, I think, you know, Jean said, come to us and tell us what you can do. I think that I don't want to be seen to be like us white people coming to women of color and saying, this is what you need us to do. You know, that's not our place to tell us what you need. But if it was possible to have some dialogues maybe within our community and get a greater level of contact between our group and your group, between just 3 or 4 of us. One of the ideas, there were a couple of the ideas we had the executive director at a group called the Network for Social Justice at our last internal conversation.
Who's the executive director
So
of?
her name, it used to be called Winchester Multicultural Network, but they changed their name and their focus. Her name is Leora Norwich. And she,
of the league?
No, she's with the Network for Social Justice.
Okay, the network. Okay, I was
community
confused. That's why I said that.
And they do a lot of great anti-racism and just, I don't know what you would call it, tolerance and anti-bigotry work in Winchester and surrounding areas. And one of the ideas she had was to take some of the clips from the Facebook Live conversations that sort of talk about understanding and process, and just, you know, have discussions about them in the community. That was one idea. But I don't know
if we can just back off from that a little bit, because one of the things that concerned me about that was that Lynn and I were very clear that you guys own the videos.
Right.
So that, you know, again, go back to we're going to decenter whiteness here.
Yeah.
This, you know, then that resource belongs to you. If we could be of some help in terms of bringing some of our resources to making it something that would spread the message more or whatever, that might work. But again, I think we talk about bringing any partner in from anywhere. They're going to have their own goals and agendas, and I think that's a whole other thing in terms of working through with them, so that it doesn't turn into something that looks more like appropriation and less like what we're trying to do. So I wanted to say that out loud, because that was one thing that concerned me, because my take on the meeting, we had one meeting with maybe 15 people there, included most of the steering committee and a few other very interested people from the local chapter league. And I was actually pretty blown away by how incredibly supportive everybody was. I expected a lot more pushback. Now, nobody came to the meeting to push back. The people that came to the meeting came because they think it's great. But people really we really processed a little bit at the meeting and set it up for people to share their impressions. I was very pleased with that.
Was it just about this, or was it
It was
bigger...
just about this and what we're doing. It was our internal conversation, basically, what it was. So that's the good news. The bad news is that's 15 out of almost 100 members, right? So you're not getting broad, we're going to decenter this and, really offer lots of resources. But some of us would like to move in that direction as we can. And it doesn't mean that the league as a whole is even typically ready to take that on as a goal. Some of us feel like that's an important piece of work we'd like to do going forward. But you're not naive about what that might involve.
Right.
So that's the chapter. And in fact, the chapter, if you may remember when I first called, I mentioned that we were thinking of having a speaker. We had funds to pay a speaker.
Right.
I knew enough not to suggest that you come for free to do a speech.
Right.
But what happened at the meeting, the public meeting, when we just recently with the internal conversation, was that we started to talk about ideas, and people sort of moved quickly on to all sorts of educational things that we could do together that would probably benefit our group in terms of education much more than yours. And no one was talking about paying you. Now, it's easy to shift to, okay, if we're going to do that, we're going to pay you and pay you well, which we do have the resources to do. But again, that's not the same as what you're asking. So then I think about the state DEI committee, which now has a new chairperson. They're meeting again. I would like to sort of suggest to them that this is clearly what you're hinting at or asking or whatever, and what I understand. And I know things have been talked about at the state level that might be very close to what you're interested in terms of leadership. I don't have a lot of personal control over it, but I can start asking. And who knows where that will go. The other thing I want to mention before I forget about it is that certainly at the national level and at the state level, they're dying for examples to be shared of chapters doing things that are innovative in any area, DEI, whatever. So one of the things we could do is to pull together clips. I could probably find the resources to do that through my family. I have a kid who does this stuff. And then work with you around, do we want to present that to the state or the National League to sort of get this message out more, or whether we're not far enough along to do that. I don't know. But I would rather do something like that than bring in another partner and start from the beginning again.
Right.
But that's just my take, partly because it's too local. And what Leora is saying though is she wants it to get a bigger message and get it out and get to more people, which I think everybody likes that idea. But I think we need to be really careful that we decenter whiteness around that move. That's just we've got to be so careful about that.
Yeah, so rather than us coming to you saying, here's the ways we can help you, that's not what we want to do. We want to find out from you how you think we can help you.
And actually, continuing the conversation maybe through an Evolve series was one of the things we thought about. Jean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to clarify something because I think I was a little misunderstood. And when I said, I'm not looking for you, the league, to tell us, look inside and say, tell us what we need help with and what to do. I agree, that wouldn't be appropriate. I meant it more of you tell us what you need to do for you to be able to work with us. And let me just say a little more about that. It's fine to bring up ideas for initiatives and talk about the bigger picture. You're hitting it a little bit. You're hitting the idea of the league as a whole, doing work and educating yourselves to talk about change within the organization, and going back and forth a little bit of some ideas of initiatives. So the commitment to continue the dialogue on the work and doing periodic check-ins so that we work towards building an authentic and inclusive partnership is important. But what's important to us, beyond the shared mission and goals and initiatives and leadership representation, all those great things that you mentioned, that when we spend time with organizations doing the work that we've been doing with you, especially organizations that have a history or are known for systemic issues of institutionalized racism, I mean, it is what it is. That's what we've been talking about. We really want, we've said things we don't want, but what we really want are real tangibles of change. And I'll give you three kind of categories that I put them in. One is buying from the top, and Angelina and Chioma both talked about that, and that means there's a full commitment to do this work, whether it be your local league or the state league, and the local leagues adopting it, that there's real thought out, talked about decision making from the powers that be, that this is important, you understand why it's important, and you understand what work needs to be done.
She's agreeing.
And that you've decided to take a deep dive into making that commitment. These are the organizations that we know are ready to work with us and do business with us, because we our agenda's full and there's so much work for us to do. We really don't have time to
reach back to teach
bring
back.
people all along the way. And it's not saying we wouldn't have these kind of conversations, but we've had this conversation. So I'm just telling you what the real tangibles of change would mean to us. The other thing is then beyond that commitment, then it's shown in changes like policies, operational systems, so that you might have women of color that are on your board, but are their voices heard? And our agenda items that they bring forward that might be important to communities of color, or important information that necessarily the league wasn't looking at without that voice there, are they heard? The league supports legislation, and are there issues being brought forward that the league supports that addresses issues of people of color? Example here, the Cape Cod League of Women Voters, which I actually recently joined, has been doing work around immigration bill. And it's really important because Cape Cod has a lot of workers that are immigrants, and 99% of them are people of color. So it's doing work like that and bringing work like that into your operational system of how you do business, even how you do voter registration, voter education. And then the third area we talk about is a model. Are you modeling the behavior that supports those changes and supports true diversity and inclusion? And it's those three buckets, I think, that represent real tangibles of change, which is what we want to see in partner organizations, along with the initiatives and programs that you might decide to do. Because then it means that there's a real, marriage is coming to my mind, but there's a real joining of minds and values. That's all I want to say about that. I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't.
Thank you, Jean. That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
I didn't mean to make everyone speechless.
No.
No.
Powerful stuff.
I'm just teasing.
We're trying to make sure you have this space because we know you don't have the privilege or presence. So.
Yeah. I don't always know how to end it except stop talking.
So I want to just acknowledge that it's 8 minutes. We have 8 more minutes. So I think a good question would be, okay, so what's next?
Yeah, where do we go?
Yeah, where do we go? And I think that there's some interesting things that have bubbled up. And I just want to mark them, and you all help me mark them, because you know the condition I'm in right now. So one is that we agree that we're talking about something deeper and not the one-offs, right?
Yes.
I think the other thing that we heard is that there is internal conversation with the chapter around supporting at least some of the bills that we are supporting, right? And what that looks like is something that we have to talk about. The other thing is an opportunity to use what we've collectively created to bring other people on board, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important because to me that's about building your base.
Yes.
Right? So, I think if we're talking about pushing a specific agenda, we need to make sure we have our base, right? Mm-hmm. And so the other thing that I heard was that there's an opportunity for Patty to present to, I don't know if you said the board or
there's
the
DEI
committee on what we're doing in this conversation, and specifically around us wanting to go deeper, right? And then I also heard that there's an opportunity for us to do something within a chapter and really create it as a model on how to do this in other chapters, right? Which is interesting because I think we already started that model.
That's what we've been doing.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
I think we've already started that.
This is it.
We're on that journey. We've done part 1. So, part 4. We're on part 4. So, I mean, so I think that's interesting. I'm actually excited about that. To be very frank, the reason why I'm so excited about that, one, because I think it puts both of our agendas on the table. One, in terms of building more of a capacity within the league to engage women of color, to see that women of color are to create pathways for women of color to be in leadership positions and to support women of color issues. But then also it creates a platform for MAWOCC, because now we're saying, look, we do know how to work with predominantly white organizations to build their capacity, and now we need to get paid for that kind of... It creates a funding stream,
right,
potentially for MAWOCC. So I'm very interested in that. So I don't know if there's anything else that you all heard of that we need to pull out and tag.
I think just on a larger level, I think it stands to reason that we should amplify the fact that we all are in agreement that this was a valuable process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone disagreed that this was important for us all to do. And I think we started with that, but I think we also, towards the end, need to amplify that this is not easy. And kudos to everyone who's been involved and stuck with it and even had the hard conversations. And, and we talked a little bit about, white women's tears, but, the fact of the matter is that our tears matter.
Mm-hmm.
Our tears matter, but I think the opportunity for us to share, and not tears in regards to crying and sadness, but for us to amplify the burden and the weight that we bring to the table when we're actually given an invitation, it's us carrying something.
Yeah.
And I think the work to lift the weight and lift our value is important, and thank you.
So I've really learned a lot from this process, and so my question is, have you as a woman of color gotten something of equal value out of this, or has it been you again just paying out of your blood for our learning? That would really worry me.
No. And
I actually think in this process we stepped back a lot.
Yeah.
Y'all figured out a lot of things. And I think we were just the pressure pushers, and the checkers, let's back up around that. I'm sorry, Angelina, I interrupted you.
No,
but I think that, for me, it was not a one-way situation. And I think it was even more like that because you all were conscious of that not being what it was. For me, it also helped me understand better the league. Was never an organization I was interested in. Wasn't an organization I was interested in partnering in, just because that's my thing, and so I think that, for me it was like, oh, okay, maybe the league does have some value to our mission, our purpose, what we can achieve. Not in a way in which the league is centered, but in a way that the league is there to support and leverage their own resources and things of that nature. So it gave me an eye-opener in that way, with the hope that the two people who are sitting here, and Jeanette who's not here, that there's more people like you all in the league so that we can build a base around this. I think it's important.
I know, I agree with Jim on so many levels. One, this is only one way that we're engaging. I'm sure there are many ways, and I know other chapters in MAWOCC are exploring other models. But also, for me, as I go forward in just the work that I do, sometimes I do come across with a certain level of passion that people say, well, Angie, you're an angry activist. And, I think there's... And when we were talking about whose tears matter, and that's why I was talking about the tears, you know, it's okay to be angry about some of this stuff, you know, and it's okay to not accept any offer that just comes through the door without having a critical eye and narrowing the door and saying, what do you really want? Because if we don't protect our people, we will just relive history.
Right.
And so this process has taught me to look at how I approach this and be okay with how I approach it, you know, because if we don't stand up, we know the rest.
I'm eager to get in, because if I don't say this now, I'll chicken out. I think for me, the thing I've learned the most is to be this close to these strong women leaders that know something that I and other white women in my generation don't understand. For me personally, it's like, you know, trying to grow to grow up a little bit more. There's something about being caught in the white woman culture, and you got the black man to support you, and I'm not particularly wimpy with my husband, but the truth is it's very different culturally, and I can't tell you how valuable it's been for me personally to be this close and this aware of how you strong people, I'm afraid I'll say something stupid.
You just say it.
How you lead and how you
We're past that.
each
We're
other.
past that.
It's refreshing. It's different for me. I have to sort of. It's been very transformative. So, and I'm very grateful. So it's been very valuable in that sense. And this isn't about learning about racism per se. It's about really starting to get the difference in the culture and the difference in what a woman who's a strong leader can really do. So I hope some of it rubs off.
Yeah, I think it's learning about people, because women of color, you know, walk around in white society every day and have to code switch and don't have the luxury of not dealing with white people every day, whereas we in white society often may not mix with people of color depending on what we do. And so this has been an amazing opportunity for me. It's really been a privilege, and you know, in my work I deal with a lot of Hispanic people and people of other immigrants from other parts of the world as well, and it's an amazing experience to just learn about people from other cultures.
And I think that's, as we evolve, we're going to even touch on that, because you know, Cindy, who was in a prior Facebook Live segment, and I were both Afro-Latina from Central America, or our families from Central America. And so there's a whole spectrum of blackness that we need to approach, and because of the way that we deal with our family who came through Plymouth Rock is different than our family
who came off the slave boat, the boat, and the most recent immigrants that are trying to cross the border.
Yeah, our families came out of the fires of Eastern Europe. So
and you know, and so even though we have a lot of similar struggles, our burden is not the same, and everybody's unique, and yet one Band-Aid is not necessarily bigger than the other, but we need to, you know, find a salve.
Maybe we
for
should
all of us.
Close with a bell hook.
Oh, sorry.
Jean?
Yes, I'm here. I was just waiting for a chance to
Put in
I
your
found
2
it
cents.
I found it valuable, and always find it valuable, to be able to have an open, honest dialogue. So we appreciate the league for their initial ask, and then for working with us to take a deeper dive and have what I found a very genuine dialogue. And I learned some things too. And I think there's some really important feedback and some good suggestions on the Facebook page that are streaming that we didn't have a chance to go to. So I think that will be also helpful and encouraging to both our groups of what was suggested there. That's my comment.
It's up there.
Yeah, we'll have to study those.
Yes, we'll have to study those comments.
And I would just throw in the last word of bell hooks: feminism is for everyone.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Are we closing?
Yeah.
Are we done?
So fearless leader.
So we are closing. And look out on MAWOCC's page for next steps, what's going to happen, what we're going to do. Yeah.
And can we, for our listeners, can we please give some feedback and comments, those groups, to what people wrote in? Because I think when you have a chance to have a look, you'll find it very valuable. And I think we should respond to some of that feedback.
On the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good idea.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you who are watching. We appreciate you. Please share, and continue this dialogue. Thank you.
I hope it
Bye-bye.
works.
All right.
We're okay.
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
We're good.
It's on.
Turn it off. Is that on?
Yeah.
No, it's not off. We're still live.
We should
We'll
let
go,
it
we're in
roll.
slow-mo.
Let it roll a little bit because I
Uh-huh.
think there's a
Yeah, there's
in the chat.
a little bit of a lag.
great. That was great.
Woo.
Yeah, it's a few minutes. It's probably about 3 minutes behind.
Oh, okay.
Maybe,
Okay.
maybe more.
I just saw Angie's by.
Angelina's waving.
Okay. Yeah. So now we can shut it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I don't think you're done quite yet.
We are.
Yeah, now you are.
There we go.
Yeah, now